Going to be talking about how to actually grow your API program. Of course, monetization is a key piece to that, but there's a whole side to the go-to-market as well. Just a little bit about myself. I'm Derric Gilling. I'm the GM for the API management group at WSO2. I previously was the CEO of Mosaf. We're now part of the WSO2 family. So if you have any questions around how to grow your API program or think about all these monetization things, please come to me. I love talking about this type of stuff. Why are we talking about this today? Well, there's two big trends we see happening within the API ecosystem. Well, first, the buying power has shifted towards individual developers. If you look back 20 years ago, most software was deployed across the entire organization, perpetual licenses, probably had a 6-month pilot period, long process to take over to get that deployed. Of course, move forward 10 years, we have the whole SaaS team concept, pizza team from Jeff Bezos, where they could pick their own software, relatively easy to get up and running, but still very UI driven. Today, we can have a single developer pick and choose the tools that they want to use, integrate those APIs, and then build out a new application in a matter of minutes, especially if you're using some of these newer code generation and AI tools. But of course, there's a lot of problems with this as well. Developers are not the easiest ones to get to adopt your APIs. They're very opinionated. They have a lot of different frameworks they like to believe in, whether it's Go or Java, Spring versus Node. So how do you actually make sure you're prepared to actually appeal to that audience? They also don't really like to talk to sales and marketing, right? They like to build, they like to code. They don't want to set up a 30-minute sales call and trying to figure out how to use your APIs through those Zoom meetings. And the other key thing is they have lots of different stakeholders to actually deal with, right? It's not just their decision. Even though we talk about the individual developer having buying authority, they still have a security team to talk to. They have a procurement team to talk to. They have to deal with whether this actually can be budgeted today or next quarter, right? And there's another trend that we see happening, which is the way that software is being consumed today is very different than just a couple years ago, right? What our belief is that every single organization on the planet will become API first. Previously, we just saw a few organizations, Twilio, Stripe, and the like. They were the API-first organizations. They, of course, got everything right in terms of documentation and that go-to-market flow, trying to get developers to adopt their APIs. But now the prevalence of MCP and these new protocols, any user can effectively start to trigger API calls through the MCP server. And so that means as an organization, as a software provider, we now need to be API-first as well. There's another key thing here, which is no longer, can I build this, right? Anyone can build stuff, right? I can set up my cursor setup and go deploy some software very quickly. So should I actually build it, right? That's another key question that's coming. And so we're going to walk through a couple of different steps around how to actually formulate a business strategy around my APIs. First, we'll talk about the pricing itself. Of course, each API business is different. We have the direct revenue, subscription-based models. We've got the usage-based pricing that we just saw. There's also other types of monetization models, platform plays, marketplace plays, where we might take a cut of the revenue, or potentially it's more of a partner ecosystem play. Regardless of whatever that monetization model is, we need to ensure that we're aligning that business model to customer value. Now, how do we do that? Well, notice here, we have a chart of different types of metrics we can charge on or look at business value, but not a single one of these is API calls. It's very business dependent, it's very industry dependent. So for example, if I'm a telecommunications API like Cinch or Twilio, I might be looking at things like number of text messages, number of SMS messages. But if I'm Stripe, I'm charging in terms of invoice volume or payment volume, right? The famous 2.9% they charge for. Of course, this is a win-win on both sides because on one side, as the customer of Stripe, of course I want to get more revenue going through my API. I want to get more transactions going through my business. And for Stripe itself, they can now encourage their customers to use more of their platform. Right? So again, trying to align that business metric that you're charging on to the customer value itself. But enough of just the monetization stuff. Let's actually dig into the meat of this presentation, which is how do we actually grow this API program? There's a couple of different go-to-markets we can think about. First, there's the well-known developer-first, pay-as-you-go model. But there's, of course, also sales-led, partner-led, and there's a couple others as well. For the purpose of this presentation, I'm going to focus on developer-first, because that's what we see as the most common, especially for these newer agentic-type workflows, where a developer can get up and running very quickly. With that said, developer-first does not necessarily mean PLG, right? Why do I say this? Well, when we think about a PLG model for any SaaS product out there, it means you usually have one single persona or a single or small set of personas that you're focused on. But when you think about developers, there's many different archetypes out there. You have different experience levels, different frameworks you have to go target, but you also have different use cases, right? They're integrating your API for a business reason. And some customers of yours or some developers of yours might be integrating for an internal application. Some might be trying to create their own application for revenue itself, right? And so there's so many different use cases you now have to consider, different volume levels, different APIs they might be using. Maybe they use one API, maybe they use 20 different APIs that you provide. And the other key thing to think about is, again, these developers are not acting on their own behalf, unless maybe they are the one-person unicorn that we keep hearing about. But for most people, they have these other stakeholders they have to consider. And so you have legal and security review, you got to go redline contracts, you have project priorities, 1,000 different competing things on the Jira backlog. So how do you actually make sure a developer, you can get the attention of those developers when all these other things are happening as well at their organization? We'll try and sidestep a lot of these processes, right? The first thing you can do is have a very simple click-through terms of service, right? Try and sidestep some of the security and compliance stuff that you normally have to do for landing a large contract, right? When we think about onboarding process, well, if a developer signs up and starts using your API at 2 in the morning, do you want to wait for them to set up a call the next day? No, make sure they can actually get up and running very quickly through a self-service onboarding. Of course, if they're going to pay for your service, can they get up and running with a credit card, or do they have to wait to go bug their procurement department? Hey, I want to try out this API. Okay, this is going to take 30 days before I can even test it. Now, why is this important? Well, this allows you to start bringing a lot of the developers onto your platform initially, and just enabling them to pay a token amount. Now, you're not trying to get them, or you're not trying to sell them an entire house. What you're trying to do here is you're trying to provide a small sample, a paint sample, just for them to test your APIs and see if it really will fit their use case that they're looking for. Right? So you're trying to shorten that time to value, shorten that time for them to pay a token amount, even if it's maybe just $100 a month or a couple $100 a month. Again, you're not trying to sell the entire house at the same time. But then from there, you're really trying to sell through these developers, right? Because these developers are going to be your best champions. They were able to build something cool, show to their manager, show to some internal team members, or maybe some external design customers, something that's exciting for them, right? And so they are now your best champions. And so it's up to you to actually work with them to identify, their enterprise requirements that they have. What does the volume look like? What are the different usage levels? And then maybe even identify some new use cases. Right? As you continue to work through those developers and grow their solution, you start to get into what I call the developer-first flywheel. Right? So this first part here, the orange stuff, that is really focused around the individual developers getting up and running with your APIs. They're not paying much, but they're starting to build momentum, and they're starting to see more and more value from step to step. And then eventually, we see sales engages. Right? Sales is engaging once a developer has already tested the APIs. Right? And so the worst thing you can do is have sales start here, right? Oh my gosh, I got to sign up and deal with 30-minute Zoom calls, and I haven't even got to experiment with the APIs yet, right? So trying to avoid as many gates as possible in those first 3 steps is really important. And then that allows you to build that credibility with these developers so that by the time sales is engaging, they already saw enough value that they want to continue to invest more into your API program. And of course, they're going to identify new use cases. Maybe they're initially using your SMS API of a telecommunications provider, and you can actually recommend the video API, the voice API. You might have a lot of other things that they could be using as well. So we talked a little bit around the GTM itself, but now let's actually dig into some of the metrics and KPIs you should be tracking around your API program. Of course, there's no shortage of different metrics we could be tracking. We got SOA metrics, uptime metrics, infrastructure metrics like CPU and memory. Not a single one of these is really aligned to business value. These are things that are operational in nature. Of course, your DevOps team, your SRE team, I'm sure they're tracking all these. But if this is what you're using to track success of your API program, you're going to fail. And so when we think about metrics, it really boils down to 3 different product goals. We have adoption goals, engagement goals, and retention goals. Now, any given quarter or any given month, these goals may change. Initially, when you launch your API program, adoption is most likely the first thing that you're focused on. You just want to get developers through the door, see if your API is actually the right solution. You're trying to get to product market fit for this new program that you just launched. But over time, engagement and retention may become the priority for that quarter. So again, looking at what are the right metrics to be tracking around your API and treating it as a product in itself. But just starting around the adoption metrics, how do we think about adoption? We like to boil this down into a developer funnel, which I'm showing here. You start off with your sign up, right? So this is the left side here. Everyone comes up and signs up for your API. And then they jump to this next step here, which is first hello world. So this is a developer that's making that very first API call. Maybe they're using Postman, maybe they're using curl. They're just experimenting with your API. Now, they're not really getting a lot of value yet, but they're at least we're able to see, hey, this might solve my use case. I should invest more of my time to experiment with the API. And then they, of course, jump forward into what I call first working app. That might be called first revenue generating app. There's different names for it. But it's really getting to the point where a developer has now built something of value that they can show to their team members, show to their employees, show to other folks that is worthwhile their time, even before they're actually paying you a dime. Speaking on engagement, right? Again, stepping forward, we're looking at this from a business standpoint. And when we think about engagement metrics, it's really dependent on the industry and product that you have. And nowhere on this chart I have requests per second or number of requests in the month, because you can actually have a ton of requests that provide very little value to your developer customers. Example of that would be if they keep polling the API, they're not using the batch endpoints in the right way, and they keep sending 1,000 transactions when they could have actually sent that through one. So the irony of this is that it's actually better for a developer to have less requests on your API than more, right? And if they are doing too many requests, that may mean you can actually bundle things in a better way for them to have one single business transaction for one API call instead of having 10 API calls for one single business transaction. And so just looking at this slide here, for example, if you're an AI API, it may mean looking at things like relevant outcomes, right? Was the response actually relevant for what they were looking for, or was it a bunch of junk, right? And it wasn't even valuable, right? If you're building out some type of automated or agentic workflow, did it actually result in some business outcome? For example, if you're building out an AI SDR program, is it the number of emails that's sent through the platform? Well, sending emails is okay, but what are you really after if you're trying to hire an AI SDR? It's really around booking meetings. It's making sure that there's some type of outcome from that workflow. Similarly for a SaaS, right? We could, of course, measure things like how many different connectors or integrations are set up in this SaaS tool, but you could actually connect an integration and have very little value from that, right? Because it might just sit and collect dust. So instead, looking at things like the usage of the different integrations, is these 20 different integrations set up in my SaaS tool, is it valuable or not? Same thing with the data API, might mean looking at things like the match rate, quality of the data, was the data of high quality or low quality? Because it's one thing to look at, say, 50 records, but it's another thing to say these are 50 records that match the results of the query that the developer was looking for. Lastly, we have our retention metrics as well. Over time, we want to make sure that we're not losing developers and they're sticking with the API program. One way to do that is to plot out retention curves. So in this case, I have two different retention curves. The red is the enterprise plan developers, and the yellow is the self-service developers. And notice here they flatten out, right? So we have an initial drop-off in week 1 from 100% down to 75% for enterprise and 38% for the self-service. But they do eventually flatten out. Sometimes they will smile up, and that's usually a pretty good retention curve. Of course, if they go down to 0, that might tell me I shouldn't keep investing into marketing and adoption. Instead, I need to figure out, why is my API not working? Why are developers not sticking around? Potentially there's an issue with onboarding or documentation, other things that might take priority before you continue to invest into marketing. So lastly, we talked a little bit around metrics and how to kick off your GTM, but how do you actually support these developers once you get them coming through the door? And of course, supporting developers is hard, right? If you actually do have a developer-first motion, you're gonna have thousands to even millions of developers. You're not gonna have enough salespeople and support people to make sure all their needs are handled. And there are gonna be needs, right? There are gonna be issues during onboarding. You're not gonna support their language or SDK. You're not gonna support their framework that they're looking for. They're gonna have changing business needs. They're using one API and then eventually that gets deprecated, or they have a new need, they need to use a new set of APIs. And there's billing surprises. They suddenly get a $10,000 bill. They don't know what to do with that, especially when you have a use-based model. That's one of the biggest concerns, is that people do get those type of billing surprises. So how do you make sure you address those and keep the developers happy? One of the first things you can do is actually watch out and track the usage for each of your accounts. So for example, when a customer has a spike in usage, make sure that you have a account manager or CS person reaches out, make sure that their needs are handled. Maybe they need to right-size their plan. You can even grant them some volume discounts, or you can potentially recommend a better set of APIs that is actually more efficient in their usage, right? So they're actually able to drop their usage, which allows them to see more value in your APIs. Another thing you can do is explore self-service type tools, right? So for example, if a developer is looking at your API at 2 in the morning, they want to be able to track that usage in real time, right? For them on their own side. Set up cost-based alerts, quota alerts, making sure that they're able to get full visibility into how their integration is doing, right? Because the worst thing that can happen is, things happen at 2 in the morning and they're unaware of it. And lastly, of course, making sure that you over-communicate any surprises. So if there is going to be a lead up in usage or potential billing surprise, keeping them informed through automated emails, through emails from your sales team or account management team, just making sure that they're aware of these type of things that are happening. Better to over-communicate than to under-communicate when it comes to developers. And lastly, don't break their stuff, right? I don't want to get waken up at 3 in the morning. Developers don't want to get waken up at 3 in the morning. No one wants to get that pager alert. So letting them know, if something is going to happen. If you do deprecate an API, giving them that long period of time, maybe 6 months, a year or more, plus what is that migration strategy, right? What is the next thing they can move to, even if it's to a competitor, different set of APIs, or something else. Of course, just quick plug on us. If you do have any questions on monetization, feel free to ping me. We now have an integration with W2, along with other API management vendors as well. Thank you very much.